For decades, a quiet question has lingered in the background of American life. It's not shouted in commercials or printed on spec sheets, but it's felt everywhere trucks are used. On farms before sunrise, on highways stretching across empty states, on job sites where machines matter more than words. How does a brand that helped build modern America spend nearly half a century chasing instead of leading? Chevrolet trucks were never supposed to be second. They were meant to be permanent, reliable, unquestioned. When people picture America at work, they don't imagine balance sheets or boardrooms. They imagine steel beds scarred by use, engines ticking as they cool, and a truck parked at the end of a long day. For generations, that truck wore a body. Chevy pickups hauled crops, tools, families, and futures. They became part of routines so ordinary they stopped being noticed. And yet, behind that familiarity is a story filled with bold ideas, early innovations, moments of brilliance, and decisions that arrived just a little too soon or just a little too quietly. This is not the story of failure. It's the story of a brand that often built the future first, but didn't always convince the world to notice. Chevrolet began with contradiction baked into its foundation. On one side stood Louis Chevrolet, a racer who believed machines should feel alive. On the other stood William C. Durant, a businessman who saw cars as a system, not just a passion. When Chevrolet became part of General Motors in 1918, those two philosophies were locked together. And almost immediately, the first Chevrolet truck appeared. It wasn't stylish. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't even really admired. It was a tool. Built on a passenger car frame, the early Chevy truck existed for one reason: to work. And it worked because it was simple, cheap to fix, and built with the understanding that America didn't need elegance. It needed dependability. Throughout the 1920s, Chevrolet trucks changed constantly. Models came and went, designs evolved year by year, and improvements were made even when customers hadn't asked for them yet. That restless refinement became a pattern. Chevy didn't wait for perfection, it moved forward. By the late 1920s, small changes began shaping how people interacted with vehicles altogether. A foot-operated accelerator replaced hand throttles. Controls became more intuitive. Driving started to feel natural rather than mechanical, and when the Stovebolt in Line 6 arrived, it didn't overwhelm with power, it earned trust. Smooth, forgiving, and nearly unbreakable, it became the mechanical voice of the working class. During the Great Depression, that mattered more than any advertisement. Trucks didn't need to impress, they needed to start every morning. As the 1940s arrived, something quietly shifted. Chevrolet trucks began separating themselves from passenger cars, not just mechanically, but philosophically. Stronger frames, squarer designs, purpose-built components. World War II froze civilian innovation, but it hardened expectations. Machines had to endure. When peace returned, Chevy did something revolutionary without making a spectacle of it. It designed trucks around people. Wider cabs, better visibility, natural seating positions. Driving was no longer an endurance test. For the first time, trucks acknowledged the human inside them. That single decision pushed Chevrolet to the top of postwar truck sales and, more importantly, reshaped the entire segment. Other manufacturers followed, but Chevy had already defined the standard. Throughout the 1950s, improvements kept coming. Smoother suspensions, automatic transmissions, electrical systems designed for modern accessories. And then came something unexpected: a truck designed not just to work, but to look refined. The Cameo didn't resemble a traditional pickup. Its smooth sides, hidden wheel arches, and polished interior challenged everything trucks had been. It looked closer to a wagon than a workhorse, and buyers didn't know what to do with it. Sales were modest, some called it a mistake, but decades later, nearly every modern pickup would follow its philosophy. Chevy didn't fail with the Cameo. It simply arrived before the audience was ready. By the end of the decade, practicality returned with precision. The fleet-side bed fixed what work crews had complained about for years. Flat sides, usable space, clean proportions. It wasn't flashy, it was correct, and it positioned Chevy directly against Ford in a way that mattered. As the 1960s unfolded, trucks stopped being secondary vehicles. Suburbs expanded, middle-class families grew, and Chevrolet responded by building trucks from the ground up, no longer borrowing foundations from cars. The CLK line wasn't just a model change, it was a declaration. Two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, half-ton clarity. Engine options that respected budgets and workloads alike. And slowly, quietly, trucks began absorbing comfort without losing credibility. Carpet appeared, radios followed, heating improved. Big engines returned with authority. Disc brakes arrived not for bragging rights, but for safety. Chevy trucks weren't chasing excitement, they were absorbing it naturally. Then came the square body era, boxy, honest, everywhere. These trucks didn't pretend to be anything else. They became part of the American landscape itself. Long production runs meant familiarity. Familiarity bred loyalty, and loyalty built culture. Chevy kept pushing beneath the surface. Diesel options, weight reduction during fuel crises, structural refinement, and when the industry faced a reckoning between efficiency and strength, Chevrolet answered with maturity rather than spectacle. The GMT for 00 generation didn't shout. It refined. Aerodynamics improved. Cabins grew quieter. Interior space expanded even as bodies slimmed. Trucks became vehicles people could live with daily, not just tolerate. Yet even then, Chevy refused to abandon emotion entirely. The 454SS proved power still mattered. It didn't sell in massive numbers, but it reminded the world that pickups could still feel visceral. By the 1990s, safety and technology moved to the foreground. Airbags, ABS, fuel injection. The Vortec engines embodied a new philosophy: optimization over excess. Chevy trucks became smoother, cleaner, and more efficient without losing identity. This was the era when the Silverado name stopped being a trim and started becoming a symbol. When Silverado officially stood on its own, flexibility became the strategy. Dozens of configurations, work trucks, family trucks, suburban tools. One platform, many identities. It was Chevy at its most adaptable. And then came one of the most misunderstood trucks ever built. The Avalanche refused to choose sides. SUV or pickup, family hauler or utility tool. Critics laughed at its looks. Buyers hesitated. But those who owned one understood its genius. The midgate transformed use cases overnight. It solved problems people didn't yet know how to describe. Sales peaked, then taste shifted. The Avalanche disappeared quietly, leaving behind ideas that would later resurface across the industry. As Silverado evolved into the modern era, refinement became unavoidable. Cabins turned digital. Luxury trims embraced comfort without apology. Materials improved. Technology expanded, and yet, through all of it, the shadow remained. Sales charts told a stubborn story. Ford stayed ahead. Not because Chevy lacked engineering, not because Silverado lacked capability, but because storytelling matters, image matters. And sometimes being first in enough if the moment passes quietly. Ironically, when GM's brands are combined, the numbers often flip. The strength was always there, distributed, fragmented, understated. Chevrolet trucks didn't chase dominance loudly. They focused on endurance, and endurance is harder to measure. If you've ever trusted a truck to start when everything else felt uncertain, you understand this story. If you've rested your hands on a steering wheel scarred by years of work, you already know why these machines mattered. Stories like this don't live in museums, they live in memory. If this journey meant something to you, support it. Share it. Comment with the Chevy truck that shaped your life. Because some legacies aren't loud enough to survive on their own, and if they're not told, they fade.